Passionate, outspoken, insightful. Ariva Martin is an award-winning civil rights attorney, best-selling author, legal commentator, and America's advocate. Live from Los Angeles, this is The Special Report.
Good morning and welcome to our viewers in the U.S. and around the world. To kick off this morning's broadcast, do me a favor. Please share the show with your online friends or start a viewing party. And remember to post a comment or question. Your voice matters, and I want to hear from you. In the fight for civil rights in America, Black women have steadily led the way for centuries. These change makers led the Underground Railroad, were the unsung heroes of the suffrage movement, organized freedom riders, started a worldwide protest movement to challenge policing and racist institutions, and Black women remain the most consistent voting bloc in the United States to stand up for the rights of marginalized people. Whether Black women are narrowing the wealth gap, fighting for police reform, or gearing up to assume one of the highest offices in the nation, when Black women lead, we all win. But by no means are Black women leaders a monolith, and their paths to top leadership positions then and now have in some cases been dramatically different. Those differences play a major role in how they lead and are received. Let's discuss. My first guest is Basil Smikle. He is a lecturer at Columbia University School of International and Public Affairs, and he is a Democratic strategist. Good morning, Basil.
Good morning. How are you? Thank you for allowing me to share my thoughts with you this morning.
Well, we're talking about female change agents, but you're my first guest, and obviously you're not a female. But I don't think we can talk about women leaders, particularly in the Democratic Party, without having someone like yourself who's been so intimately involved in, just kind of watching the evolution of Black women in particular in the Democratic Party. And I've got to first ask you, for you, what did the appointment of Kamala Harris at the top of the Democratic ticket by Joe Biden, what does her nomination mean in this moment for the Democratic Party?
Well, it meant so much to me, and I like to think that I'm somewhat representative of where the party has been and would like to go. I'm a child of Jamaican immigrants myself. I'm someone I'm Gen X, and a Black man who grew up at a time when I'm the same age as the Central Park or Exonerated Five. I remember Yusuf Hawkins and so many other racial incidents across the country, and I was shaped by them. So criminal justice reform has always been first and foremost on my mind, including the fact that so many friends of mine had been killed or were in and out of prison by the time I graduated from college. And so someone like Kamala Harris, the pick by Joe Biden, is inspirational. It's something that I think gives a significant emotional boost to Democrats and to the country as a whole. As a researcher, I know that historically vice presidential picks don't generally help the person at the top of the ticket because people vote for that person. But I think she is in the unique position and is uniquely qualified to give that kind of emotional boost and enthusiasm shot in the arm to voters, to the party in this particular cycle, in stark contrast to what we're seeing from the right.
I've known Kamala since college, and we've remained friends. We're family friends, and I've actually been a part of, several of her campaigns, including her recent presidential campaign. So I've gotten to travel with her and to listen to her give her stump speeches. And one of the things she always does is she always pays homage to those African-American women who paved the way. And she usually talks about Shirley Chisholm. And she did that in her acceptance speech, because as we know, Shirley Chisholm was the first Black woman elected to Congress on the East Coast, and she was the first Black woman to run for president in 1972. Let's listen to what Senator Harris had to say about Shirley Chisholm.
Sure.
And these women inspired us to pick up the torch and fight on. Women like Mary Church Terrell, Mary Cloyd Bethune, Fannie Lou Hamer, and Diane Nash, Constance Baker Motley, and the great Shirley Chisholm.
So Basil, Senator Harris did a roll call there. She didn't name all of the women that have shaped her career, but she did name some heavy hitters like Fannie Lou Hamer and Diane Nash, Constance Baker Motley, and of course the iconic Shirley Chisholm. What do you think? In this moment again, we just celebrated 100 years of the 19th Amendment and women's right to vote. We know that that amendment didn't include African American women. But when we, as a Democratic Party, get to hear someone like Senator Harris name check, those women who came before her, how does that help us frame what we're seeing in this 2020 election?
What I think it does is it creates a continuum, right? To say that this is not just an isolated moment. She is part of a long history of activism in our community led by women. I would add folks like Ida B. Wells and Ella Baker, who I've studied, so many others that are unnamed and not necessarily known, but have done incredible work in their community, particularly around education and trying to move the next generation forward in activism. That it's incredibly important that those names get mentioned because, as I said, part of it is understanding that we're part of a long continuum, but it's also an acknowledgement that that even though white women and there may be movements among white folks, that doesn't necessarily include us, and it doesn't necessarily make it about us, that there is an intersectionality that is important to understand and to be mindful of. And I think sometimes that does get lost. I'm glad that she called attention to it, as did others throughout the primary election cycle. In fact, Elizabeth Warren spoke a lot about intersectionality, but it's something that I feel, particularly within the last few months, has gained a tremendous amount of additional and warranted attention. And I think what Kamala Harris's appointment or acceptance of the nomination, her inclusion in this ticket brings a tremendous amount of attention to intersectionality of Black women.
And I'm sure, Basil, that you're familiar with the work of Professor Kimberly Crenshaw from UCLA, who's actually a Harvard classmate of mine from the law school. And Kim is credited in many ways of really raising the nation's consciousness around that whole concept of intersectionality, particularly between race and gender. And she has written about it extensively, talks about it extensively. And I think, as you just said, we're having this conversation and really getting to witness what that intersectionality looks like in real life. Another classmate of mine, I don't know if you've read him, Lawrence Graham. He's a New York Times bestselling author. Okay, so Lawrence had an interesting piece out over the weekend, and he said, Kamala is to Black folks what Barack was when he was, coming up in the party in 2008. And I'm seeing that debated. Some people said that about Kamala Harris, as she was running for AG and running for Senate, and others are saying, Harris is no Barack Obama. Where do you come down on that debate about, is this our Barack Obama moment?
Well, I find it interesting because if you remember in 2007, Black people weren't really fans of Barack Obama at first. In fact, for almost all of 2000, I think pretty much all of 2007 after he announced, he was polling in the single digits among African Americans, not until Iowa. And then certainly by the time the primaries got to South Carolina, did you see his numbers bump up. There was a healthy amount of skepticism about his candidacy, in part because he didn't come through traditional sort of political pathways and clubhouse politics. But I think that was important for him to win. And that's why I raised that. It's really important to understand this. If you think about the Democratic Party then, it was basically three different sort of rings. Communities of color, white working class men, most of them, white working class voters, most of them union members, and these sort of young professionals, Gen Xers, who were high educational attainment and pretty much high income. He got a lot of support from that group, that high educational attainment, high income group. A lot of community, a lot of folks of color, a lot of African Americans. And in many ways, Barack was a peer because the Democratic Party at that time didn't really engage young Black professionals. They sort of just lumped everybody in. You talk about intersectionality. They just sort of lumped everybody together. If you're Black, this is, Black community, we're going to treat you somewhat as a monolith, right? But I think what the Obama campaign understood is that no, they're not a monolith, and that there are folks who are, who may have a similar sort of educational background, a similar background to him, that the party just never engaged. And in some ways, I think Kamala is similar. She didn't necessarily need to come through the sort of clubhouse politics. She is representative of a Gen X African-American voter and activist who, if we didn't take to the streets, we may have given money. We have ascended the sort of upper echelons of corporate America. And those folks always wanted and needed an outlet to engage politics. And Barack gave them an opportunity to do that. And I think in many ways, Kamala has done very similarly. So in many ways, I think they are very similar. But, there are other folks that look at them and say, well, you're not really a descendant of Americans, who were enslaved. Do you really have that Black experience, that Black American experience? And while, as a child of Jamaican immigrants, as I said, I hear that a lot too, even though I was born here. But I get it to some extent, but it also, again, speaks to what I mentioned before. Black community is not monolithic. And there are many aspects of the African-American community that both Barack Obama and Kamala Harris have been able to speak to. And that really is a testament to sort of where the country is going, the kinds of conversations we need to have as a community going forward, but it also connects us as people of the diaspora, which is incredibly important to me.
Yeah, I think you're so right in terms of what both Barack and Kamala represent, which is the diversity. So when we talk about, and we know Joe Biden got in a little trouble talking about African Americans and our diversity, and oftentimes people don't understand how diverse we are, even within our own family units. There can be tremendous diversity. So we're going to have that conversation with her on the national scene for at least the next decade. But I want to talk to you some about the attacks that she's come under. And when we look at the evolution of African-American leaders in the party, we know that journey has not been easy. And with a president like Donald Trump, he didn't wait a second before he went on the attack of Senator Harris. Let's take a look at, something he said about her recently.
Very nasty. One of the reasons that surprised me, she was probably nastier than even Pocahontas to Joe Biden. She was very disrespectful to Joe Biden, and it's hard to pick somebody that's that disrespectful when.
I almost hesitate to ask about it, but obviously he is the president. He has this amazingly, humongous bully pulpit. He has his 80 million Twitter followers. So we can't ignore those kinds of ridiculous statements, but we do have to frame them and put them into context with people. And I do worry that his followers will listen to those kinds of attacks and that they could, be encouraging to someone who's, to the extent there are any independents left. What do you think those attacks may do to voters, going to the polls in November?
Well, listen, so campaigns generally are about expansion, right? You have a base and you try to expand upon that base. Donald Trump doesn't seem like he's interested in doing that. He's interested in really focusing on his base, not expanding it. So any outreach that he makes to African Americans, to others, is not about getting their vote. It's about tamping down their vote. It's about keeping them from coming out. You add to that the layer of conversation and attacks that he's leveled against the post office at a time when we're trying to move toward more mail-in voting opportunities. And so I think they're falling on more and more deaf ears as the campaign progresses, because as I said, he's not really building on his base. But you're right to acknowledge that his base is solidly behind him. So it's not really about us worrying that he's getting more and more appealing to a wider swath of the American voter. It's that the number of people that want to come out and vote against him may not be able to exercise their right to do so. And that's what we need to spend a lot of attention on, in these next couple of months. Does what he says work? It does for his base, but it also works to drive energy against him. And so we have to make sure that that energy is captured in a vote that's cast and counted.
And that was my last question I was going to ask you. Do you think those kinds of attacks may backfire? And with the nomination of Harris to the Biden ticket, we saw, a record fundraising that happened after the announcement. We saw over the course of the 4 days of the convention, like $70 million was raised. And there has been some evidence that her, as you said, unlike other vice presidential nominees, she has added something substantial to the Biden ticket. So do you think, combination of the attacks with Harris on the ticket, we will see African-American turnout, at least, back to those 2008 numbers that we saw with Barack Obama?
So I hope we see the African-American numbers come out as we did 12 years ago. I think his attacks are backfiring in the sense that he's losing some of the people that took a chance on him 4 years ago. Older voters, suburban voters, particularly suburban white women. I would add to that his response to the unrest after the murder of George Floyd added a lot to that. And so I think what's happening here is Kamala is walking into a situation as the vice presidential nominee where she has very clear lines of attack against both the president and the vice president in their handling of multiple issues and crises facing this country. And he alluded to the way she went after Joe Biden. I actually think that was one of the reasons that Joe Biden wanted her on the ticket, because she is unafraid, as Shirley Chisholm said on Boston on Blog. And so if she continues in that vein, I think she will be the asset that we all believe her to be. And in terms of how she responds to those attacks, what I've been saying is, if you've seen anyone throw shade, she will throw a deeper shade of shade that we have ever seen at the presidential level. So I'm excited about that. I'm looking forward to it.
Well, we got to leave it there, Basil. Thank you so much. I know you're going to join me at the end of the show, because we're going to be talking about some of the women change makers who we may see on the scene at the Republican National Convention. So sit tight and I'll be back with you a little later in the show.
You got it.
Talking about change makers today, then and now. And boy, my next guest, she is every box that you could check in terms of someone who has made history. She allows you to do that. She is a part of that cadre of Black Democratic women who paved the way for Kamala Harris's historic nomination. She's a history maker herself, because she was the first Black woman to be elected to Congress from the West Coast. And in 1973, she became a California Congresswoman. And in 79, she became the first Black woman to serve on the powerful LA County Board of Supervisors. And I'm going to be joined momentarily joined the Honorable Yvonne Burke. She is here with us this morning. She's having a little problems with her audio, but we're trying to work it out so that, I think she's coming on. This is live television, so sometimes stuff happens, but we're getting Supervisor, the Honorable Yvonne Burke, on the call.
Hello, how are you?
Oh, good morning. Thank you so much, Supervisor Burke, for joining me. I've been so excited about sitting down with you. You are, when I thought about change makers and we were going to be sitting down talking to change makers, you came immediately to my mind, because you have been like the first in almost every category we can think of. So my first question to you is, what does Kamala Harris's nomination mean to you, given that you've spent the better part of 4 decades of your life in politics?
It's very, very exciting. I can't really explain how important this is to someone like me. I don't know whether you would remember, but I ran for Attorney General of California and I lost by 1 or 2%. And when Kamala decided to run, I was one of the first people to support her, because I thought it was very important, never believing she would be the vice president. And I'm just saying now, she will be the vice president of the United States. And it's so exciting. It's exciting because she makes a tremendous impact. She is strong, she's articulate, and she's caring. And those are the things that we really need in a person who's a leader.
Well, you know a whole lot about leadership. So if you tell us that she's the right leader for this time, we have to take that as word. You were actually in Congress, Supervisor Burke, in the 70s, and that was a
Right.
period of upheaval in the United States, including things going on with the civil rights movement, the protest against the Vietnam War, women's liberation, and even the impeachment of Richard Nixon. So when you
Right.
look at where we are now with the Black Lives Matter movement and the recent impeachment of Donald Trump, are you having deja vu, thinking back to that period when you served in U.S. Congress?
Well, it's very different. I think about the years that I was there. I was elected in the Vietnam War era. And I also was there when Richard Nixon was impeached. And of course, he actually resigned. But I was listening to the tapes. All of us were listening to the tapes at the time he decided he would resign. Well, I don't think we're going to be fortunate enough for this president to resign, but it's an exciting time. It's a time when people are moving into new visions, new roles. And to me, the fact that we're seeing women in new roles, African Americans in new roles, and the country is starting to recognize there's so much that we can contribute. And we're eager to contribute and we're prepared to contribute.
Well, you became the first woman actually in the US Congress to give birth while in Congress. And you made history with that birth because you actually were on the cover of both Ebony and Jet. And as African American little girl who grew up in a house that always had Ebony and Jet on my table, and I think I speak for generations of Black families who grew up loving Ebony and Jet. Tell us, what was it like back then to see your face, to see your baby, to see your family on the covers of those major magazines?
Well, I was excited. I was very, first of all, I was surprised. I didn't really, first of all, I did not realize that there had not been a woman in Congress to have a baby. So I thought that this was going to be just another issue. And all of a sudden they say no one else had a child. No other woman had a child in the Congress. And it became a big to do. And of course, the other issue they raised was that she's kind of old to have a child, which today that's not an issue. But at that time, it was unique. And it was unique for a woman to be in a position that demands tremendous amount of time and effort and stress to then take on having a child. But, it's one of those things we all do. We do what we have to do and we do the things that are necessary. And I always felt if there was some way I could contribute, I would not let the fact that I was a woman, not let the fact that I was African American, not let the fact that maybe I wanted to have a family like everyone else keep me from doing the things that I thought would help community and nation.
Well, you were definitely a trailblazer. And I just want to say that that beautiful baby that we saw you holding in your arms has grown up to be a beautiful young woman. And now she's in politics. She actually serves in the California State Legislature.
Right.
And I'm sure your career in politics inspired your daughter, Autumn Burke, who now represents parts of Los Angeles in the state legislature in California. So I just want to ask you, you know, what what message do you have for young women, whether it's your daughter Autumn or other women who are just taking their roles in Congress or maybe in the state house around this country? We see Donald Trump attacking Kamala Harris, attacking Maxine Waters, attacking AOC, attacking so many of the women that are in leadership positions. What would you say to those women who are coming under attack as they attempt to lead in the same way that you did when you were in office?
Well, as far as Donald Trump is, he attacks everybody. And he attacks because that's all he knows how to do. He uses the words that are applied to him on someone else. But you know what? The reality is nothing is easy. There are no easy jobs that have responsibility. And so I say to young women, don't expect that it's going to be a walk in the rain. It's a responsibility, it's a challenge, and you have to want to do it. I said to my daughter, if you want to do this, I'm with you. but I'm not pushing you to do it because I know it's not easy. And if you want to have a family, it's even more difficult. So
Right.
the main thing is say, don't let anybody hold you back and move forward and do the things to where you can contribute. And every one of us has certain abilities that are needed out there in politics, in government, and in society. And what we have to do is say, if I have something I can contribute, nobody's going to stop me from doing it. I'm going to go on and I'm going to make that challenge.
Well, it's important for me to note that before you were in Congress, you also were a member yourself of the California State Legislature. And when
Yes.
you left Congress, you didn't just go home. You then came back to Los Angeles and became the first African American and the first female to serve on the powerful LA County Board of Supervisors. And that board governs over 11 million people and has the budget the size of most states. So why, Supervisor Burke, did you continue your career in politics? After leaving the state house in California, going to the U.S. Congress, why come back to L.A. To govern at the local level?
Well, there was a long time in between. I came back to Los Angeles. I started practicing law. I became a member of a large law firm. I did a lot of other things, became member of boards and was involved in the community. And then when I was approached to run for the Board of Supervisors, I wasn't sure I really should do it uh, because I uh, didn't know for sure whether or not people would accept me coming back after such a long time. But I had a lot of support and people helped me. And in a very difficult campaign, I won. Well, and I have to say this, I've never had any easy campaigns. So if Kamala asked me, I'd say, you're going to win. It's not going to be easy. Nothing ever worthwhile is easy. I always had very difficult campaigns, but the important thing is I was successful. Not always. I had a lot of defeats.
Well, one thing we've seen, Supervisor Burke, is how aggressive some of the men have been. We talked about Donald Trump, but there've been other men, like we saw that congressman who got up in the face of AOC, admonished her, called her name under his breath. How did you deal with men like that? I'm sure in the 70s, when you were in office, the 80s, even into the 90s, that you had to deal with difficult men. How did you deal with them?
Well, my approach was just to hit them head on. I mean, you can't be shy. And I think everyone always assumed I was very low key. I didn't curse them out, even if I wanted to curse them out. I dealt with them on my level, and my level was to address the fact that whatever they were doing to me, and they called me a lot of names that I won't even mention on television, but you have to rise above. The important thing is no one achieves anything where anybody just hands it to them.
Right.
And people can be very nasty. I think Trump, though, has brought a new level at that level of leadership, a lower level of challenges than I have ever seen. I have never seen a person in his position make a little petty kind of terrible comments about people, personal comments.
Right.
But that's the person that people put there.
Yeah.
And I hope that they don't accept that and they don't understand that that's not leadership. But the important thing is my mother would always say, keep your head high and move on. And that's the only thing I can say to anyone who's being subjected to these petty, racist comments and the kind of things that in this day and time you didn't think would ever happen. Just put your head up high, keep walking, and you'll step right on them.
Well, with that, I'm going to say thank you again, Supervisor Burke, because you have done just that. You've kept your head high and you've continued to lead with dignity and grace. And we thank you for your decades of service to our country and to our state and to the county of Los Angeles. And thank you for being a mentor and a friend to me. I really appreciate you so much. This is an honor for me to sit down with the iconic Congresswoman, Supervisor, State Representative, and lawyer extraordinaire, Yvonne Burke. Have
And you're a
day,
great
Supervisor.
example.
Thank you. Wow. I am sitting down with powerful women today, and I am super excited. My next guest, she is from my hometown, so I'm always excited when I get to interview folks from St. Louis. She is a nurse, she's an ordained pastor, and she is the Democratic nominee for Congress from Missouri. Corey, Black Lives Matter activist, shocked the Democratic Party when she beat 20-year incumbent Congressmember Lacey Clay, ending his political dynasty that spanned more than half a century. Good morning, Corey.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Welcome and congratulations on your historic win.
Yes, thank you.
Wow, like I said, I'm from St. Louis, so just watching you and what you've been able to do has been so incredible. I've talked to so many friends at home about your campaign, about the energy and the excitement, and I can tell you that folks are incredibly enthused about what you've been able to accomplish. And I had a chance to sit down with Ella Jones, who also first Black woman mayor from Ferguson, and just all that
Yes.
energy coming out of Ferguson has just been amazing. So just tell me, what kind of whirlwind have you been on since you won that primary?
Just things that I didn't know, I didn't know all of a sudden, like Congress members will reach out to you and want to congratulate you. I'm like, who gave out my phone number? Like, it's just like this, like, is that's a thing that I didn't know about, all of the media. But I remember in 2018, after AOC won, she and I, we were friends. And so once she won and she was coming to St. Louis, then there was just like this swell of media and everything. So I kind of remember that part, happening before. But just on the ground, oh my goodness, people are coming, just walking into my office, just like they want to talk, they want a picture. People are taking pictures with my picture. It's just, kids have been coming up to me on the street. Like it's been people, I walk outside of my home and people are driving down the street. There's the Congresswoman, hi. And people are turning around. Like I'm like, oh my gosh, what just happened? But then also seeing people who felt like, you know what, I couldn't be vocal about supporting you. I voted for you, but I couldn't be vocal for whatever reason. Now they feel like free. It's like, okay, now I can be public and support you. I want people to feel that way. In 2 years, I want people to not feel like, oppressed by like, I have to vote this or have to be quiet and all of that. No, support who you want to support. You gotta, this is our democracy. So I'm just excited.
So you didn't expect to be like this instant celebrity, but
No.
you have become, and you earned it, because I read that you ran the ultimate grassroots campaign. I read somewhere that your team made 500,000 calls, that you
Yes.
recruited over 2,000 volunteers, and then you knocked on 25,000 doors. So
In 1 month.
oh my God, in 1 month.
It was something like 1 month. We didn't we had some done before COVID, but COVID was when we were supposed to like go boom, and so we started basically in July with our big canvas program.
So I know, Corey, that you had run for Senate in 2016, and you ran
Yes.
for this congressional seat in 2018, and you lost both of those elections. So what was different this time around?
Starting off with more name ID, and people in the district know me for the most part as Corey the protester, because I had been, part of the Ferguson uprising. And then 2017, after the Jason Stockley verdict came out, after Anthony Lamar Smith was murdered, and so being a part of those protests, people knew I worked with the unhoused population, but people knew me as a nurse, but they didn't know me. They didn't know this side of Corey. And it was hard for them to kind of see that. So when the film that I'm in, Knock Down the House, with AOC, Amy Villela, and Paula Jean Swearingen, when that hit Netflix, well, when it just went out, first of all, but then when it hit Netflix, people saw me in a different way. They're like, oh, she's not somebody that burns down buildings. And, this is I never done that. But she's not that person. And so it humanized me. So that helped. And then when I became a national surrogate for Senator Sanders' 2020 presidential campaign, it raised my name ID even more. It helped with fundraising. And once the fundraising hit, that is what helped us to get more staff, and we were able to put some other things in place. And then COVID-19, people said, okay, nurses are heroes. And so it's like, oh, Corey's a nurse. She's been talking about these things for a long time. Then I went through my own COVID-19 story, and I was public about it. I was very vulnerable about what I was going through because I wanted people to know that this thing is real. So I was public about that, and then went straight into protest.
Wow.
So people
And
saw me continue to push.
And that's what I think is so unique about you, Corey. I'm talking to change makers today, and I just talked to Congresswoman Supervisor Yvonne Burke, and she, became a national leader in the Democratic Party after having been a lawyer. You come from the protest movement. You, like I said, you're a healthcare worker, you're a nurse, and I don't know if people know that you actually spent some 400 days plus
Yeah.
on the streets of Ferguson protesting following the shooting death of Michael Brown. And people often ask, what happens to protesters after the protest is over? And now you're a good living example of what happens to those protesters. How did you, though, move from that, protest, that passion that protesters have into electoral politics? So, what was that day and what was it like when something told you, I want to run for office?
Yeah, so I said I would never do it because my dad's been in politics most of my life. So I was like, I said those words, I will never go, I will never run for office. But during the time when after Michael Brown was murdered and we were protesting, someone came to me and they asked me, an activist actually that's been murdered since. He was Black Lives Matter out of, I think it was North Carolina. And he asked me to run. I was like, I'll never, no, why would I want to run? But when I thought about every single person that I saw out there, everybody that I encountered, every time I saw an innocent person brutalized by police out there protesting for justice for somebody else, every time I saw that, and I saw that the coalition that I hadn't seen in St. Louis before, where you had your Latinx, you had your Muslim community, you had, your Asian American Pacific Islanders, you had the Black community, you had all of these different communities, LGBTQ, coming together to say Black Lives Matter. To have that heart in Congress, I had to go ahead and say yes. And then I want to save my son and my daughter, and other people's loved ones. I can't be quiet and allow somebody else to become another hashtag when I could have done something about it.
And I thank you for saying that, because what you're really saying is that this is personal for you. It's not just about the
Absolutely.
other people that you're standing up for. It's about your own kids. And as a
Yeah.
mother of 3 kids and a son, and I talk about my son a lot. He has autism and he's a tall kid, and I worry about him and what his experiences might be like with encounters with the police. But what moved me about your protest, you just weren't leading the charge. You were actually amongst those protesters that we see who've been tear gassed, who've been
Yes.
actually assaulted by police officers. Tell us
Yes.
about that experience. And again, how you got up the next morning and kept going.
Yeah. So it was the day. So one of the experiences was the day that the announcement was made that Darren Wilson would not be indicted for the murder of Michael Brown. And I remember just thinking that, we have all of these people on the ground right now from all over the country, or the world, and maybe they haven't experienced tear gas before. So I came out to the streets not as a protester necessarily that night. I came out as a medic and as clergy. And, I was helping people. This lady, just a real quick story, this lady, someone yelled out saying that their mom was having a heart attack. I pushed it away for a minute, but then I went back to check on this woman. I felt like maybe she was having a heart attack. I asked some people to help. We picked her body up and we carried her we had to go to the police lineup because EMS was behind them. We went to this police lineup. They pointed their guns at us and told us to drop the woman. I wouldn't drop her. I'm like, I'm the nurse helping her. You're not skilled to take care of her. Get me to someone who's skilled. Give me a paramedic. Next thing I knew, my body went up into the air. I just remember seeing the stars coming towards my face and then the ground coming towards my face. And then I was just stomped by several police officers in steel-toe boots. And and then they tear gassed me and the woman. But after I made it through that, it took me 24 hours to even sit down after that situation. But, I came back out because I thought about, look, if they did this to me, You know, if they'll do this to me and I'm helping someone, you know, what happens to the rest of our community if we don't stand up? So I went back out, and I didn't go back out hating police. I still don't hate police. I hate the brutality. I hate the excessive force. I hate the corruption, you know, and the bad policies. So that's why I keep going.
Wow, and there's so much to keep going about because even as we're doing this broadcast this morning, Corey, I'm sure you've seen the news coming out of Wisconsin, coming out of Louisiana. You know, yet again, African American men have been shot, and hopefully the young man in Wisconsin is in a
Yes.
hospital in critical condition, but hopefully he will survive. So I know that you know I don't even know how we get past that. We've been talking so much about you know criminal justice reform, and I know you've been a big proponent of what some people describe as defund the police or reallocate resources. How do you think you take that message from the streets of protesters into the governing body of the US Capitol and make real criminal justice reform?
You know, it's been activists that have made things move in this country for the last that I've seen, of course, before the last 6 years. But for me personally, I've seen that work happen, that perseverance, that diligence, and how we educated ourselves, you know, in areas that we didn't even know existed. You know, we didn't even understand how to get there, but we figured it out. And now legislation has been pushed all across this country, you know, and as it relates to criminal justice reform, hundreds of pieces of legislation or more. And so that's how we continue to put pressure. And so as a politivist, I'm an activist and a politician, you know. So as that
Wait a minute,
politivist,
is that a word? Wait a minute. What you
that
call
I
yourself a
made it one.
politivist?
I
I
made
love
it
it.
one. I'm a
Okay.
politivist.
All right, we're gonna write that down, team. We're gonna
Yes.
hashtag that.
Because I won't be separated from it, because that's what we need. We need that same fire and passion and drive and tenacity to be able to push and inform policy. And so we can have all the policy we want to, but if we don't have the backing, if the community is not galvanized behind it, then it falls flat. So that's how I feel like we'll be able to get this change that we're looking for. So when we say defund, when we talk about defund, I think about how in Minnesota, you know, after Philando Castile was murdered, and the governor said, okay, we're going to give $12 million for police training, you know, but then what happened? George Floyd was what happened to George Floyd a product of that police training? So did money help? You know, so that's not the answer. So we need to make sure that that police aren't social workers, that police aren't educators in the schools, that police need to be police while there's such thing, you know. So we need to take that money and put it in our health and human services. We need to put the money where we are underfunded. We're not saying the police won't be funded, but they don't need money for tear gas and rubber bullets and pepper balls and all of that. They don't need money for MRAPs. We need money to take care of our communities. And so that's what I'm going to fight for.
And I really love, Corey, how you just described that because, you know, Donald Trump and the Republicans want to put a label on Democrats that somehow we want anarchy. We want to completely destroy, you know, law enforcement as we know it, rather than reimagining what public safety can look
Right.
like and how public safety can really, you know, do what its mission, you know, is set out to do, which is to protect and serve, rather than what we saw in that clip of you being
Yes.
tear gas. And I hope you keep speaking out the truth about what the word, which has gotten a, you know, they're trying to make it a bad word. It's not a bad word. It's a good word. It's a good thing to
Right.
reimagine how we protect communities, particularly Black and brown
Yes.
communities. And I just want to say to you, one of the things that I've heard from my friends in St. Louis who I've been talking to, they said, I asked them, I said, what happened to Lacey Clay? What happened in that election as I'm trying to do my own due diligence? And they said he lost contact with people on the ground, that he lost contact with
Right.
the Black community. I grew up in Car Square Village. I lived in the Jefferson Cass community. I
Oh.
lived in Jennings. And some of my friends said, you know, the Black folks, they lived in those communities where I grew up. He lost contact with that community. But I have to imagine taking on that kind of political dynasty wasn't an easy thing to do. So what was that like for you going up against a family that had literally been in that office for 50 years?
Yeah, and been in that office. My dad helped Clay Senior. You know, my dad helped Clay Junior. I did, you know, as a child. You know, so yeah, it was like, yeah, I had to give people first of all to understand that, you know, because it was like, oh, you're a Black woman challenging a Black man. Why would you do that? You're a traitor. And then it was also, oh, you're a Democrat challenging a Democrat. You're a traitor. So I had to get past all of that, but I kept pushing with my message. Because to me, you say what you want to say, label me what you want to label me, call me what you want. But at the end of the day, Michael Brown was murdered, and we saw a militarized police force on the ground 2 months after Congressman Clay, when he could have voted to demilitarize the police, he didn't. He supported police militarization in that amendment, and I was abused by that same force, and so many others like me. When I would think about how years ago, I got caught up in the payday loan system, the same payday loan system that Congressman Clay benefited from financially. When I like all of those things, and just thinking about out of more than 400 days, we were out there protesting on the ground. We weren't the ones paid to take care of the community. Congressman Clay was paid to take care of that area, and he didn't show up for us. He had a photo op. And so for me, I couldn't stop. I'm like, you know what? This heart has to move forward. So, no matter what I had to go through, I was going to keep going, because our needs weren't being met. The leadership was not there. It had to be, and for me, it's like legacy. Leadership over legacy. Legacy can't run the day. Nostalgia does not put food on the tables of people in North St. Louis or North County or anywhere else in this district. Our unhoused population don't have a place to live off of nostalgia. We have to get past it, and that happened.
I want to play a little of your acceptance speech, because you encapsulate everything you just said so eloquently in that speech.
Mm-hmm.
Counted us out. They called me, I'm just the protester. I'm just the activist with no name, no title, and no real money. That's all they said that I was. But St. Louis showed up today. So St. Louis showed up today.
I get goosebumps watching that. I just love it. I love my hometown being so progressive and just showing up for you in that way. I've watched that like 10 times, and I just love how I know you're a minister, and you were preaching a little in that acceptance speech. Before I let you go, though, Corey, I want to ask you about Kamala Harris. Historic nomination. Black women, girls, white women all over this country, super, super excited. And I know you were a supporter of Bernie Sanders. I know that you have some issues with the background of both not the background, but the record of Senator Harris and Joe Biden, and you've been very vocal about that. But you've also been very clear that there's a binary choice in this November election. And it's the Biden-Harris ticket and it's the Trump ticket, and that you're all in for Biden and Harris. So I want to ask you, how do you encourage, or how are you going to encourage voters like you that maybe didn't support Harris and Biden? How are you going to get those voters to the polls?
So what I've been doing is just telling people, like, the things that you dislike about what's happening in our country right now. When we look at, even today, when we're looking at what happened with the young man that was shot in the back 7 times, will we see that get better? Do we know that will get better, or stay the same with a Trump presidency? Or what do we think that will look like, with a Biden Harris? What do we know that we know? Because right now we've seen basically our president treat the office as if it's his own, like it's his own genie bottle. It's whatever he wants to do. And so in order for us to put a stop to that, we have to put a stop to him, which also takes out his administration, which also affects these governors around the country and these other lawmakers around the country that feel like they can do the same thing that he's doing. So it's tearing up communities all over the country. So we have to stop him in order to help stop that. And we can't continue to allow somebody in that seat that's going to push and fuel the hatred that's happening all over right now. So for me, the communities that I fight for the most, those marginalized communities of color, Black folks, disabled folks, unhoused people, kids in cages, all of those groups, people that are low wage, the amount of fight that we will have to have with a Trump presidency is going to be greater than what we know we will have with a Biden-Harris presidency. And so that's what I have to look at. And so that's why I'm pushing for it. He cannot continue to just tear up our communities like this, and we lay down for it.
So what would you say, Corey, to someone who, and we've seen some activists, some progressives, some activists, some young voters who are saying, I'm not feeling Biden Harris? How do you move them? How do you get them to see that they've got to vote like their lives depend on it in November? What's your message to
Because
them?
the message is I most likely will be right there in Congress and I can write all day long. I can do exactly what you asked me to do as an activist and as a politician. But once it gets to the Senate, if we take the Senate, but then when it gets to the presidency, what happens to that bill? So I need you to put somebody in the position that will be most likely to support the bills that you're asking me to work on. I can do all the work in the world in the same way as protesters. We were out yelling and screaming and doing everything that we could, trying to get visibility, trying to bring this awareness. But what we saw was it stopped when it got to the place where legislation needed to be created. Well, now we're there. Legislation can be created, but will it be passed and will it be put into law? That's how we get it, is making sure we have the person that's most likely to do that.
That's an excellent message, because oftentimes people separate the presidency from the administration and how government works, and letting, educating people on, they send you to Congress, but if they don't, vote so that we can take back the Senate and take back the White House, your work will be limited. You won't be able to pass those bills that will impact
Right.
their daily lives. So that's the message that I think we've got to keep educating people about. We need a new attorney general, right?
Oh,
Because it was Eric Holder who came into Ferguson. And it was
right.
Eric Holder that did the consent decree around the country to these police departments that had systemic
Yes.
racism. So we've got to think about this as a big old happy family. It's not just
Right.
who's in the White House. It's who's in the Congress, who's in the Senate, and who's in those critical cabinet positions. One question before I let you go. I read someplace that you've never stepped foot in the U.S. Capitol. So
Never.
what is that day going to feel like? Because I'm just, speaking it into existence that you're going to win in November. So what do you think that day is going to feel like when you actually cross the threshold into the U.S. Congress, having come from the streets of Ferguson, now being Madam Congresswoman?
Yes, so I get to have a visit next week, actually. So that'll be my first time. It was a surprise thing. It was it wasn't expected. So I get to do it that day, and I don't know what it's gonna. I don't know. I'm gonna walk in feeling like a visitor and feeling like I need to be learning where the bathrooms are at the same time. But then just the thought of the day when that thing is actually real, when I'm crossing the threshold as the Congresswoman, the first Black Congresswoman from Missouri, is I just I'm a crybaby, so I know I'm going to cry, and just the idea that when you work hard for something, it's you work hard for something so hard, you put your heart into it, and when that thing happens, so it's that thing. I've been praying about it and believing God for it and all of these things, and people have said, but when you get it and it happens,
Wow.
yeah,
That's
yeah.
fire. That's fire, Corey. I'm just so happy for you. I
Thank
know your
you.
daughter and your son must be ecstatic. You are an incredible role model.
Yes.
We didn't even get to talk about it. At one point early on in your life, you were one of those people that lived in your car. So when people
Yes.
talk about, possibilities, and that's what the Biden campaign is about, possibilities, you have had so many lived experiences where people should have counted you out. But
Yes.
you were never down. You just kept standing back up. And here you are now going into the U.S. Capitol to represent my hometown and the communities that I grew up in. And I couldn't be more ecstatic about it. So you got a
Thank
fan
you.
in California. So if you need anything, I
Thank
got
you.
your back, girl.
Thank you so much. And thank you for
Thank
this
you.
opportunity.
All right. Wow. I just love powerful women. And we are just having that kind of day on the special report. I'm going to bring back in our Democratic strategist, Basil Smikle. So, Basil, Cori Bush, what an amazing story from the protest movement in Ferguson to the halls of the U.S. Capitol. Talk about a change maker.
Yeah, and absolutely. And we've seen that over and over again throughout the country, particularly going back to the midterm elections and even before that. I mean, it's not just a sort of wake up call for the establishment Democrats, but for the country as as the halls of Congress welcome these very progressive candidates, particularly these progressive women who, even before Kamala Harris accepted her nomination for vice president, were talking about how their unique abilities and history and background and perspective are going to be able to change this country. And so I'm looking forward to it. I've been around a long time, so I've seen change as it comes, and it's not always comfortable. It's not always comfortable. It's not always. I think for the people who face that change, it's not always welcome, but it's necessary. And
Yeah.
so I'm excited for this.
And I love that Corey is, we didn't expect everyone that supported Senator Bernie Sanders, and he had millions of supporters across this country.
Right.
And we know that there are some real policy differences that he had from, the Biden administration or the Biden ticket when he was running for president, even before Kamala Harris came on the ticket. And we know we still have those issues to work through. We just had this beautiful kumbaya convention, but we still have policy differences. That's why we're the Big Tent, party. But what I love about Corey is a willingness to come together for one single purpose, which is winning not just the presidency, but winning back the Senate and sending more Democrats to the House, and then working through those issues. And that's what we have to do as Democrats and as people who care about this country. So again, I applaud her, and trailblazers like Yvonne Berg. They really made it possible so that we could have a Cori Bush and a Kamala Harris. But I want to switch gears with you for a minute. Today starts the Republican National Convention, and we get to see some powerful Republican women who have been out front in the RNC. So I just want to ask you, what should we be looking for in the next 4 days as the Republicans take to the airwaves to try to make their case as to why Donald Trump should remain in office for the next 4 years?
Well, you're going to see, I think, people like Nikki Haley who want to portray themselves and have already been portrayed as the sort of future of the Republican Party. I think the big question, though, is what does that Republican Party look like post-Trump? He is supposed to be speaking every night of this convention, which is incredibly unusual. So he'll be setting the tone he personally will be setting the tone for the rest of this election cycle. But you have a lot of Republican leaders and some of the grassroots that feel that he's taken the party in a wrong direction, and that the Republican Party and conservatism as they knew it no longer exists. So I'm curious as to whether or not any of the speakers, particularly some of the women who will be speaking, are going to be speaking more in terms of the future. Are they going to encourage voters to look beyond Trump to the future, or are they going to be solidly focused on him? I know that's going to be a tricky line to walk, and it's got to be incredibly nuanced, but in some ways they have to do that. They have to be able to get Republicans to think about holding their party together and not jumping ship to report for Democrats. I know I'm saying that against my own interests, but if I were to give them advice, I would say that's what they should do.
Well, we know, Basil, with the Democratic convention, the 4 days that we watch, I don't know how many women, but clearly it appeared to be more women were on the stage and in taped videos than we saw men. So I'm curious, do you think the addition of Tiffany Trump, someone we've hardly heard anything about, we know she's the youngest daughter of Donald Trump, do you think adding her to the lineup is the way that the Republicans are trying to counter the Democrats and make sure they have as much female representation on the stage as the Democrats to try to match that female power?
Well, I'm sure they were taking notes. There's no question about that. And one of the things that you saw with the Democrats is that you heard from a lot of people who have longstanding relationships with Joe Biden or Kamala Harris. One of the things that was very moving was when Barack Obama bestowed that Medal of Freedom to Joe Biden and talked about his years and years in public service and even his bipartisanship with folks like former Senator John McCain. And so I think what the Trump campaign and the Republicans are going to try to do is mirror that to the best that they can. He's clearly not been a public servant for very long, so he may not have those longstanding relationships in government, but he would need to, I think, highlight his family a little bit more, or what relationships he has built with people in different communities and in different states with the working class voter. He needs to highlight a little bit more of that, again, to remind voters that took a chance on him in 2016, why they might want to still go with him in 2020. And I will say this very quickly, even though the economy is bad right now and there's so many people out of work, there are voters that still give him high marks for it, but bad marks on the handling of the virus. So even a marginal shift in language and handling of the virus can make this race a lot tighter than most people think. And so adding to your question, I would just say, you know, he needs to show that he cares and that he's somewhat sympathetic. I don't think that's the Donald Trump we've ever seen. But we may never see that Donald Trump. But
Yeah.
if I were to give them advice, that's what I would say.
Yeah, that's going to be hard to pull off the caring Donald Trump. I don't think we've
Yeah,
ever seen that.
there's only one Donald Trump in my opinion, and we've seen him. So
And he shows up, and
yeah,
we
that's right.
know from that famous quote, when people show you who they are, believe them.
That's right.
So
That's right.
we need not be disillusioned about who Donald Trump is. One last question I want to ask you, though, about we know that Donald Trump continues to make this incredibly false statement that he's done more for Black people than any other president, maybe, you know, like, with the exception of Abraham Lincoln, who freed the slaves. He has the audacity, the unmitigated gall to compare himself to someone like Abraham Lincoln, you know, be damned, Lyndon B. Johnson, and so many other presidents who have been incredibly, you know, pro-African American in so many of their policies. But Alice Johnson, we know we're going to see her. She's the African American woman that Trump, you know, freed from serving a
Right.
long prison sentence, and we know he's making a play for Black voters. And Alice Johnson is going to be there at this convention, presumably to help him make that play. Is that going to work?
What that will do is work for some white voters to make them feel that he has done the necessary outreach to African American community. Look, I don't take anything away from the fact that she's no longer in prison. That's important, and it's important for her and her family. There's no question about that. But again, Donald Trump isn't about addition. He's more about subtraction, in that he's focused more on keeping people from voting against him than he is from encouraging folks to vote for him. And I think that's, to me, I don't, so I see it as an important conversation that, or important speech that's going to be made for the Republicans in that environment. But I don't know that it brings a lot of Democratic support or African American Democratic support into that column. And look, just very quickly, as a Black man, I do understand the challenges of supporting either party. You know, I could make arguments that Democrats haven't done as much as I wanted them to, and arguments that Republicans haven't done as much as I wanted them to. If I look at something like Black home ownership, we're at the same level as we were before the Fair Housing Act. And so, you know, how much has really changed? A lot, but not enough. And I think for so many African American voters, they're sitting out there saying, well, who do I go to? Who do I go to? What should I do? And to Corey's point earlier, whatever, even if you have trouble making this decision, focus on two things. Number one, the fact that you do have an African American woman on this ticket, even if you don't like who's on the top of the ticket. And number two, of the policies that you want to see changed, who do you think is going to have the most attentive ear and be the most responsive? And so I think no matter what Donald Trump sort of brings to the forefront or onto stage, I think for African Americans, that and the answer to that question will still be the Democratic ticket.
Well, we have to leave it there, Basil. Thank you so much. I'm in total agreement with you. No matter how you slice it, it's still the Democratic ticket. So I
Yeah,
hope
right.
everyone is encouraged to vote like their lives depend on it this November. Thank you for your insights, Basil, and thank you for joining me this morning.
My pleasure.
I want to thank all of my guests. It's been an incredible morning with the Honorable Yvonne Burke and Congresswoman-elect, soon to be Congresswoman-elect Cori Bush, and my Democratic strategist that joined me this morning, Basil Smikle. And thanks to all of you for joining me. You can continue to be a part of this conversation by following me on all social platforms at Areva Martin. Before I get out, some words to live by. 2020 has been an amazing year for women leaders in public office. And it ain't over yet. We have witnessed a record number of women run for and be elected to Congress. And that combined with the historic nomination of Kamala Harris gives me and so many women and girls confidence that we can continue to chip away at the proverbial glass ceiling that has held us back for decades. Thanks to Yvonne Burke, Shirley Chisholm, Maxine Waters, Barbara Jordan, Diane Watson, and all of the trailblazing women who brought us to this moment, a moment where powerful and dedicated activists like Cori Bush can lead at the highest level of our government. I am super excited about this new generation of female leaders, their tenacity, their diversity of backgrounds and thoughts. Now, pundits are predicting that their mere presence on the political scene will inspire record high voter turnout in November. I concur, and I go further. And I predict that the presence of these powerhouse women on the national scene will forever change how we think about Black and Brown women. Goodbye, Aunt Jemima, and hello, Madam Vice President. I'm out, y'all. Be safe, and don't forget to wear your mask. And we are all in this together. Don't forget that.